Hey guys, this is Isha, and today we're going to try to understand the terms glycemic index and glycemic load. Glycemic index refers to the rise in blood sugar levels over a 2-hour period post a meal. This usually ranges from 1 to 100, and any food having a glycemic index of more than 70 is supposed to be a food with high glycemic index, and any food with glycemic index value of less than 55 is supposed to be a food of low glycemic index. In the given graph, we see the red line, which represents a food with high glycemic index, and we see how it corresponds to a higher rise in blood sugar levels, whereas the food represented by the yellow line corresponds to a food with low glycemic index and also is causing lower blood glucose spike. The value of glycemic index of a food is essentially set against a reference, which is glucose. So glucose is given the glycemic index of 100, and all the other food items are given glycemic index values with respect to that. For example, watermelon has a glycemic index of around 75. Now the question comes in, how is glycemic index calculated? So a food item is taken in such quantities that around 50 grams of available carbohydrate is present. So this means for glucose, around 50 grams of glucose would be taken, whereas for watermelon, around 700 grams of watermelon would be taken. So the values of glycemic index we saw before corresponds to this. So on ingesting 50 grams of glucose, we got a spike of blood sugar levels corresponding to 100 glycemic index, whereas consuming around 700 grams of watermelon corresponds to getting a glycemic index of around 75. Now, glycemic index is not quite a very fixed value. It can be affected by many factors, such as method of cooking, the amount of fat and fiber content in food, and the different ways in which we might consume food. So the question comes in, why are we calculating glycemic index? So glycemic index was initially calculated to help people with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes manage their blood glucose levels with their diet. But we just saw the concept of glycemic index and it does not seem quite realistic because it's highly unlikely that we are going to be consuming 700 grams of watermelon at one go or consuming pure 50 grams of glucose in our meals. And here's where the concept of glycemic load comes in. Glycemic load not only considers glycemic index, but also the amount of carbohydrates in one serving of food. If the value of glycemic load is less than 10, then the food is supposed to be a low glycemic load food. And if the food has a glycemic load of more than 20, it is supposed to be a food with high glycemic load. The formula for glycemic load is glycemic index of a food multiplied by the amounts of carbohydrates per portion divided by 100. So let's go back to the example of the watermelon. Suppose we consumed around 100 grams of watermelon at one go. So let's try calculating the glycemic load. The glycemic load would be 75 into 7.2, which refers to the amount of carbohydrates present in 100 grams of watermelon divided by 100. And we would get the value of 5.4. So it's highly unlikely that eating some amount of watermelon would lead to high blood glucose levels. This is because watermelon relatively contains less amount of carbohydrates even in large quantities. So I hope the difference between glycemic index and glycemic load were clear. You can see the difference here in a chart format. If there is any other term that you want to know about, do comment them down below and I will try to explain it to you. And until then, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.